Hey everybody, this is Brandon with Web Design Tuts, and today we're going to be kicking off a brand new tutorial series where we're going to be dealing with this design that we're looking at right here. It's called ShutterPress. It's a custom template that's going to be designed for photographers, and it could obviously also be used by other designers and illustrators and stuff like that. But the main idea for this template is going to be to show off images. So that's going to be basically targeted at more visual people. Eventually, this is going to get coded up into an HTML site, and we're also going to be showing you guys how to customize it into your own custom theme. And lastly, if there's enough demand for it, I think eventually we might even turn this into a WordPress theme that might be available up on ThemeForce. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, just go ahead and let us know in the comments, and we can look into getting that all set up for you guys. So today we're going to be going over just the design session. It's important to note that this video tutorial is going to be basically duplicating a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing inside of the written tutorial that's going to be available down below the video. The main thing to kind of note for the video is that the purpose of the video is basically just to see somebody work in Photoshop. We're not going to get everything exactly the same as we have inside the written version, but if you guys are looking for exact say hexadecimal values for colors or exact spacing or anything like that, just go ahead and poke on down to that section inside the written tutorial, and you guys can kind of see what exactly it's supposed to be. So like I said, this initial video is just going to be to give you guys a rough impression of how this thing gets made in real time as it happens. So we're going to record this in one big swoop. So hopefully the video is going to be hopefully it'll be under an hour, and you guys can basically just watch how this thing gets made. So we're going to get this started out by creating a new document. The document is going to be 1280 by 800. I happen to have that document already set up over here. Let me go ahead and close the duplicate. This particular document size happens to be kind of arbitrary. It's just a big size that I know is going to look about the same on every different browser out there. Obviously, our template is not going to be 1280 pixels wide. The reason being that that's not going to fit on smaller monitors, but we do want a bigger document size so we have space around the edges for people to basically be able to see the background. So we're going to get this started out by creating our basic content container. So we'll start a new layer. I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool, and I'm going to set the radius to, let's go ahead and set it to 12 pixels. Obviously, you guys can go ahead and use whatever radius you guys want. If you want something more rounded or more squared, you can kind of tinker around with that. The basic size we're going to be creating, and we're looking up here at the info panel as I draw, is going to be 992 by 643. And if you guys want to check out the written tutorial, you guys can kind of see how I arrived at that number. It's a little bit of, so let me get this dimension right. It's a little bit of, kind of arbitrary math, and it's a little bit of intelligent thinking. That looked close enough for me. The basic idea behind that is we're looking at the 978 grid system site where they happen to conveniently display all of the safe maximum widths and fold values for all the different popular browsers that are out there right now. When it comes to the width, we basically want something that's going to be under 1,000 pixels wide. In our case, we want a little bit of space along the edges for people to see the background color. But aside from that, we're basically just kind of freeballing this where we're, just kind of trying to get the biggest image possible up on the screen. So it's going to look good on big browsers, but it's also going to fit inside of smaller browsers. So we're going to start out with this basic rectangle. The color at this point actually does not matter. I think in the tutorial I used like a gray or a blue or something. We'll just go ahead and pick a gray again just to be safe. Right now our background color is just white. We're going to add some color to that later on. But we want to get started by creating this basic shadow. So I'm going to start out with the brush tool. I'm going to grab the basic setting and we're going to set it to 60 pixels. You'll see that the hardness is set to 0%, so it's a nice soft shadow. And I'm just going to create a new layer, and we're just going to set it to draw. We want to go about halfway across the document. And as you can see here, I accidentally drew it too far down. So that's not going to quite work. We want to draw it up a little bit higher. It's going to be 1 second to get that right. Here, 1 second. All right, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and redraw that. And we're going to draw it across our content container until about the halfway point. And sometimes drawing and transforming and stuff goes a little bit slower while I'm recording the screencast. So if you guys notice it delaying a little bit, that's why. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit Control-T, and we want to transform this. I think inside the demo we did about 2.5%. And we're going to set that. And next thing we want to do is hit Control-J, and we're going to go up and hit Transform Flip Horizontal. Control-J basically just duplicates whatever layer that you're selected on. And then flipping it horizontal just basically flips it horizontally. So we basically want to grab both these layers now and select Control-T. We're going to do a quick free transform. And we basically just want to get it just about the size of the actual content container. There's a couple reasons for that. I mean, number one, if you have a shadow that's going way out here, it's going to be a little bit harder to set once we get to the coding phase. There are other reasons that, you basically don't want it to be too big, but that's the main one. So now that we basically have this basic shadow, let's go ahead and merge these two layers really quickly by selecting both of them and pressing Control-E. I'm going to drop them behind the content container so we can kind of see what's going on here. And kind of, move it up a little bit and, kind of nudge it around until you get exactly where you want it. This shadow happens to be a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit generic for me. So we're going to do something really quickly. We're going to select Edit, Transform, and then Perspective. And we're going to add a little bit of dramatic perspective to it. That looks pretty good right about there. And if you're noticing any artifacts or anything like that, you're welcome to just go ahead and hit Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just add a very light, blur to it. That'll just get rid of any rendering artifacts that might have popped up. And let's go ahead and drop it down just a little bit. I didn't do this in the written tutorial, but I'm noticing it's a little bit, hazy right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the smudge tool. Make it nice and big, and I'm just going to bring a little bit of this down. And the important thing to note here is that, I mean, like Photoshop is a drawing tool, so there's no reason we really need to, just use basic transform stuff. You can kind of get in there and smudge it up with your finger if you want. So that looks pretty good. We could probably clean it up a little bit more, but for the purpose of the tutorial video, I think that looks pretty good right there. So let's go ahead and nudge that back up so it looks about right. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the opacity down. I think 60% is pretty good. And now I'm going to basically create a copy of it by pressing Control-J again. And I'm just going to scale it in here a little bit, drop it down just a little bit. And that basically is going to create a quick core shadow. Just got to play around with it a little bit more. Give it 1 second to render. Okay. The next thing we want to do, because we're noticing this harsh edge right there, is add that blur once again. In this case, we're going to add a little bit of a bigger blur to kind of spread it out a little bit more. That looks pretty good. And I'll just nudge that up. And basically what that does is it creates a harsher shadow right along the inside that makes the object above it feel a little bit heavier. So that's one way to create the shadow. I want to show you guys basically another quick way that you can create one that's not going to be in the written version. So let's go ahead and group this down. I'm going to name this Old Shadow, and then we're going to show you a new way to do it. So what we basically want to do is grab a rounded rectangle tool, create a new layer, make sure it's set to a black color, and we're going to go basically let's go ahead and mimic something close to the actual container that we're dealing with here. And we'll go above this. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to rasterize this, so create a new layer and merge that with the vector layer. And let's go ahead and blur this out really big. Looks pretty good right there. And now basically we're going to do a similar thing that we did with the other one, in that we're basically just going to do a quick transform and perspective-ize it, if that's a word. And again, we're just dropping this back in space. And get pretty dramatic with this if you guys want. I think that looks pretty good right there. So the next thing we're doing here is we're just kind of dropping this down. And as you can see, we can kind of scale this in a little bit again so it fits right around the size of our content container. Let's go ahead and drop that down and see what it looks like. I think that looks pretty good right there. Once again, you basically are going to want to drop the opacity down on this layer. Let's go ahead and do 70% in this case. And let's do the same trick with the core shadow. Make it smaller. Let's go ahead and blur it out once again. Won't go so big this time. And let's move it up right there. So you can kind of see with the core shadow and without it right here. The core shadow just adds a little bit more depth to the center of that. So that's, again, just another quick way to make a shadow. You know, there's lots of different ways to do it. The main thing that we're kind of going for when we're creating the shadow is that we want it to not be, number one, a drop shadow, which is basically just a layer style, because you can't really slice that. We want it to be something that, you know, when it comes to it, we can basically just come in here and crop it and save it out as an image for the web. So that's basically our end goal with that. You know, once you kind of hit that layer, whether you want to use your, you know, basic brush or whether you want to use a perspective you know, rectangle with some blur, you know, either way is going to work pretty well for you guys. So let's go ahead and grab everything and kind of nudge it up. At this point, we want to add our background color. First, let's go ahead and group these together and name them the new shadow. Cool. So the first thing we want to do to add our background color is create a new layer. And we're going to hit Shift plus F5 to fill it in with white. And let's go ahead and move it above our main layer at this point. Now we basically just want to add some noise. We have a full tutorial on the site for how to do this, but we're going to go over how to quickly do it right here. So in the written tutorial, I use 14%. Now I'm going to use 16% to make it a little bit more dramatic. It might show up a little bit better in the video that way. What we want to do is drop this back behind our main layer. We're going to set the blending mode to multiply, and the next thing we're going to do is basically just add a little bit of color behind this. Once again, this is going to be one of those situations where it's going to be a little bit different in the written tutorial because we're not getting the color values exactly the same, but we'll get it pretty close here. The next thing we're going to do is, because basically this noise is gray at this point, we want to add a little bit of color. So let's go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Hue Saturation. If you guys haven't worked with adjustment layers before, they're pretty cool. The main value of them is that you can basically go in here and you can make any adjustments that you want, as you can see. And it's going to be completely separate from the layers, from the layer below. So you're not degrading any you know, of the images below by adding this you know, adjustment layer. So if you guys, you know, for instance, wanted to switch it up and make it red, you can easily do that. So that's all there is to that. So let's go ahead and group these together really quickly. Let's name them the background colors. It's all simple. We'll drop it on back to the very back. And once again, you can kind of see that, you know, things are kind of you know, working organically here. So as I make changes to the background, I may notice that I don't like how the shadow is. So I may, you know, kind of come back here and tinker with this until it gets perfect. But as I'm working with this document, I'm continually making changes. So it's not kind of a step-by-step process. It's more of a, you know, kind of make some changes and go back and tweak things kind of process. So the next thing we're going to be doing is making our content container white. We don't need to have it a color anymore. And next we're going to add a basic border around it. It's going to make a nice light gray border. Doesn't have to be really intense. It just has to be enough to kind of create some visual separation between the background color and our foreground color. So that's that. The next major thing that we're going to be doing is creating the sidebar space. So let's go ahead and create a new layer group. We're going to name it Sidebar. Let's name it Sidebar, I guess. And we want to add our logo. For the sake of brevity, I'm just going to go back and grab the logo from our main design. The reason for that in this case is going to be basically that you guys are probably going to be using your own logo. So there's not a lot of reason for us to walk through how to design this logo if you're going to be using your own. So once we kind of have our logo in there, the logo is going to give us an idea of what kind of space we want to have our sidebar be. I think in our case, we ended up picking something like 292 or something close to it. Again, I'm looking at the info panel as I'm drawing this, and I've used the rectangle marquee tool. And all I'm really using this for is as a quick ruler to kind of see what kind of space we're looking at here. And maybe it's closer to 230. So once we kind of establish where that line is going to be, let's go ahead and just grab a quick gray color. And we're just going to draw a single 1 pixel line from the top to the bottom. That looks pretty good right there. And I'm going to go back and check really quickly what kind of space we had inside of the in the original. Just because I don't want to get too far off track. So it's 234 right here. So as long as we're looking pretty close to that, we're going to be okay. Let's go ahead and move it over a couple pixels. Now, normally when I'm designing this from scratch, the basic thought process here is we're trying to just get a nice harmonious kind of spacing around everything. I like where the logo is. I like how much space it occupies in the visual hierarchy at this point. It's not too demanding, but it has a little bit of pop to it, so it feels pretty good right there. The other thing to kind of consider once we're going to define the sidebar space is how much space we're going to need for some of the navigation items. In our case, we don't really have really long gallery titles. You might have custom wedding photography, but even that's not going to be really super long. So let's go ahead and add some of this navigation text. Now, one thing to note here is that I'm not grabbing straight black. I'm going to grab something that's just a little bit off black. Right here, we're going to be 25 across the board for the hexadecimal number. And I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to create the text box in about this space right here as the logo. And I'm just adding some basic links. There's nothing crazy going on here. Let's go ahead and set this really quickly, and let me check my image size really quickly. And noticing that my resolution is at 96, let's go ahead and set that down to 72 and go back up here and set this to 1280. It's not going to change the document at all, but it will affect the font size. So let's go ahead and put this back at 12. And let's go ahead and set this to 36 for the line height. Now, once again, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to go back into the demo and grab this text really quickly so that we can move past some of this indent stuff. But the main thing to kind of note here is that we have a basic, what you would call an accordion sidebar menu. I think in the written demo, we added a guideline right here at the right side, or at the left side of the logo. And the idea with that is we want to hang all text and everything else that's going to be inside the sidebar space off of that line. So everything is kind of based on that logo. So you get a nice clean vertical line up and down the board. The only exception to that is going to be once you have accordion menus. In this case, we're just adding a couple spaces of text space. And that just creates a basic indent that we're going to be using. So the next step is going to be to create our horizontal dividers. And in our case, we want it to be a slightly lighter gray than what we used for the outer border. And we're just going to draw a single line across the board there. And once we get that in, we want to kind of nudge it down. And all I'm doing at this point is hitting Control J and kind of moving these lines up and down. You can also select duplicate layers. Just kind of moving them up and down until we get them perfectly spaced in between those navigation items. And a lot of this is kind of, just mundane work, but sometimes it's fun to see somebody else do it. I think that looks pretty good right there. One thing that, you kind of want to note here is that we have an active link. It's basically just using a basic blue color. We could have used a different color if we wanted. You guys might want to use a different color yourselves. But whenever you're dealing with this kind of accordion, we want to basically set off the way it's interacting with the main content layer by adding, in our case, just a white rectangle to block off how this vertical border is showing up. And what that does is it basically makes this active link appear as though it's a tab. Later on, if we wanted to, we could basically, create a duplicate of this layer and make the entire sidebar a different color, for instance, by masking it off. So say we maybe wanted to make it a light gray. But basically we're just trying to create some nice visual separation between the left and the right. In this case, if we want to do this, we just kind of drop that in there, drop this to the back, and you'll kind of see very quickly that the way that this accordion menu integrates or interacts with the main content layer is pretty obvious. So we're not necessarily going to add this background color, but that's the basic idea behind the UI that we're dealing with here. So the next step that we have, first let's go ahead and organize some of this stuff. Let's group everything together and name it navigation. That way we can quickly toggle it on and off. And the next thing we're going to be creating is the social media bar. And once again, we're just going to add the word social. I'm going to grab the text color from the text that we had up above. I'm going to grab two of these horizontal dividers, move them out of that layer group, move them down by our new word. And we're just going to drop it in where we want it. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to go and grab some social media icons. I happen to have some just kind of gathered up already for us. So I'm just going to grab them. We're going to drag them onto our Photoshop document. And we're going to hit enter a couple times so they lock into our new document. This may just take one moment here. It's still loading. All right, there it goes. Okay, so now we have these in here. So I'm just going to grab all of them and slide them down. Now I happen to grab just kind of random social media icons. So really quickly, I'm just revealing this guide once again and pushing the word social back so it lines up perfectly again. And I'm just going to grab these and I'm just going to kind of nudge them over a little bit so they're basically separated by a couple pixels of space. In this case, I'm just holding down the Shift button, so we basically get a perfectly defined set of nudging pixels. Alright, so that looks pretty good right there. So it's going to move these around until they're exactly where we want them. I think that looks pretty good right there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group them, give them a name. I'm going to duplicate that group, and you'll see why in just a moment here. Because basically I'm going to go in here, I'm going to merge these really quickly. I'm going to hit Edit, Image I should say, Adjustments, and then Desaturate. The basic idea is we're going to be trying to illustrate later on that when the mouse hovers, these become a color. But at this point, we just kind of want them all grayed out because we don't want them to distract too much from what's happening on the rest of the layout. So that's the basic methodology behind that. So let's go ahead and group all this stuff together. Name this the social widget. And we're going to create the search bar widget really quickly. Just give me a second to drag this up. I'm going to create a new layer. And in our case, let's create a new layer group as well. All right, and all we're going to do is make a let's make it a 4-pixel radius rounded rectangle. Once again, we're looking at the info panel. I want this to basically line up with this guide right here. And for the sake of kind of drawing this very nicely, let's add a guide on the right side as well. And we're just going to draw a 25 pixel high rounded rectangle. We're going to make it the color white, but we're going to add a very light stroke around the outside. I only want a 1 pixel stroke. I think that looks pretty good right there. You can get a little bit fancy with this if you want, by basically adding some inner shadow and stuff like that. Just keep in mind that anything that you design in here is going to be something that you have to code later on. So the fancier you get with stuff like form fields, the harder it is to actually code. The more likely you're going to run into problems and stuff like that once you get into working with different browsers. So that's our basic form field right there. Oops, sorry about that. And let's go ahead and grab the magnifying glass and drop it in. Once again, we're going to hit Enter. And I'm just going to move it over the search bar. And once again, I'm going to select Control Shift and U. And once we get it rasterized, let's go ahead and desaturate that quickly. All right, perfect. All right, so we have our basic search bar right there. All right, so the next thing that we basically need to do is we need to, first we're going to close off this layer group and we need to start working on the main content stuff. I'm going to go quickly through this simply because I'm going to go into it in a lot of detail inside the written tutorial. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a quick layer group. We're going to call it the 4x4 grid. And I'm just going to go very quickly through how to create these basic thumbnails. I'm going to start out, I'm going to create a simple rectangle. It's going to be 155 pixels wide by 125 tall. Alright, perfect. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit of a brighter color so we can kind of see what we're working with here. And I'm going to do this a little bit out of order from what we did inside the demo. The main thing to note here is that we're basically going to be adding about 32 pixels of space between the left side and this. So we want to get 32. And again, I'm looking up here at the info panel as I'm drawing all these different lines. So basically I want to nudge this over until we get to that side. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. And that looks good there. So we're just going to drag these out, and I want about 21 pixels of space in between each module. So let's go ahead and draw that really quickly. And you'll notice here that I'm just using a new rectangle as just kind of like a quick spacing tool. And we'll just kind of duplicate these over so we can get the spacing perfect. All right, good. Now let's go ahead and go back and delete our guides. And the next thing we're going to do is we want 18 pixels of space down here. So once again, looking at the info panel, let's go ahead and give this a different color. That's pretty close there. Let's go ahead and make it green. And all I'm going to do is go ahead and grab all four. We're going to duplicate them, and we're just going to shift them on down. And let's grab that with our guide and bring those down. And we're going to do this one last time. And once again, we're just going to go ahead and delete the guides that we created. We no longer need them. And lastly, we're just going to add some quick visual styling. We're just going to click one of these layers, and we're going to add, I think it's an inner stroke. It's going to be 2 pixels, and we're just going to pick a very light gray. That's going to work fine there. And let's add a drop shadow. In our case, we're just going to set the spread to 100% and bring down the size a little bit. And what that's essentially going to do is allow us to make a drop shadow into a stroke, because it's going to be solid. It's not going to be, kind of feathered out or anything like that. So that looks pretty good right there. So let's go ahead and copy this layer style and just very quickly select all of the other thumbnail layers and select paste layer style. And let's go ahead and group that together. For the sake of brevity, what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go ahead and grab all the images from the original and bring them on over. And they should line up pretty darn close to what we just did. But that's going to save me the time of having to go back and reproduce all that work of dragging the images in. And the next thing we need to do is we need to add the pagination buttons at the bottom here. And that reminds me, we actually skipped a step on the accordion where we added these buttons right here. So let's go ahead and drag those in really quickly. And we're just going to position them on the sidebar layer. Let's go ahead and drop them in there. Now, to create these, all we've really done is we've created a, I believe it's a 11 pixel by 11 pixel square. It's a rounded rectangle using a 2 pixel radius. And once again, we're kind of looking up there at the info panel. As we draw, 13 is pretty darn close. And all we've done is we added a very light stroke along the outside. And we added a gradient along the inside. And that's perfect. And all we did is add a text plus and minus on the inside of that to create that button. So the step that we're looking at right here is basically we want to grab the layer style from that, and all we're doing is applying that to these 2 circle buttons, and that creates our very simple buttons for the pagination. So that completes that grid system for the gallery template. So let's go ahead and close this all up. And once again, for the purpose of organization, let's go ahead and close everything down so we can see what this looks like. You're going to notice as we're kind of working with this that if you're organizing your Photoshop file properly, it begins to almost look like a HTML document where you can kind of turn things on and off, and you can kind of begin to notice how you might approach the coding of this thing. So once we get to the coding phase in day 3, that's going to play a pretty important role. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new group. go ahead and close off our 4x4 grid. And we're going to basically be starting our homepage design. Now, as I'm mentioning in the written tutorial, we're doing this a little bit backwards. The reason we started with the 4x4 grid is it's one of the most important pages in this template. It's arguably more important than the actual homepage itself because we really want to get this perfect. But by kind of going through and setting up these layer styles and getting a basic feel for how we want padding between elements and stuff like that, we've kind of done a lot of the work for the homepage design. So we're going to get started on this by turning off the 4x4 grid, and we're going to start a new rounded rectangle because we want a big image slider at the top of this. The size is going to be 716 by 438. And I'm going to set our rounded radius to 10 pixels in this case. And we're going to do 716 by 438. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and nudge it over and move it up. Let's go ahead and move both these layers above the sidebar layer, or sidebar layer down below it. So what's the reason that we're basically making this homepage design? What's the reason we're giving it less padding than the 4x4 grid that's set in a little bit further? The main reason in our case is this visual impact. We want something that's going to be big and dramatic. So we basically kind of want to extend the borders of this thing so it looks bigger. For photographers, that's a pretty important thing because you want that image up on the front page to be big, you want it to pop, you want it to make an impact on your viewers. So that's why we're doing that. So in our case, we have our basic container for the slider. So let's add some basic styling to it. Let's add a nice big inner shadow. And it's going to add some drama to the images that we're looking at. Let's add a very light outside stroke. In fact, let's make an inner stroke for the sake of simplicity. But let's drop the opacity so it's nice and light and it almost mimics what we were doing inside the thumbnail gallery. From here, we basically just want to create our tabs. Most sliders are going to have some pretty generic tabs. Maybe you'll get like a 1, 2, 3 down here. We want to do something a little bit different with this so that this kind of looks kind of fun. We want to draw a 92 pixel diameter circle. That's pretty good. And we're using a black color. And we're going to drop the opacity just a little bit. And let's move it over here to the side. And all I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to grab a Marquee Tool and make a selection that kind of matches up with this. And I'm going to apply the layer clipping mask. I'm going to nudge it over so it's perfect right there. That looks good. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to select the text tool. And I'm just going to draw our little left arrow kind of shape. And the font face that I want to use is Lucida Sans. We go ahead and double check that really quickly. Demi-bold is the face. Alright, let's go ahead and smudge it together really quickly. Kind of get that in there. That doesn't look quite right, so what I'm going to do for the video is I'm just going to grab this really quickly. And you guys can obviously do the same thing. The other thing that you guys can do is you can go ahead and create a custom shape tool and go into your shape library in Photoshop. Just kind of get a feel for what's in there. You can use your own custom shapes, but that should give you a pretty good idea of what's going on there. All right, so let's go ahead and group those together. We're going to duplicate it. And we're going to flip it horizontally. And we're just going to drag over to the right. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, obviously, you can drop in your own image on top of this, and you can kind of complete the effect. In our case, we're going to move quickly past that and add our text modules down below. So as I'm going to kind of discuss inside the written tutorial, the basic way that we're going to get these, kind of text module sizes is, but it's kind of playing around. I usually start by drawing, basic set of 3 rectangles. And the main thing that we're looking at here is, kind of the spacing between these modules. So if you look right here, if we use these kind of big rectangles, there's very little space in between the modules. So if you have text running across this entire thing, it's going to be pretty hard to read or separate between the modules. So the main thing that we're looking at here is we're trying to play around with it, just using some trial and error, dropping the size down, doing some duplication, dragging these out until we get a basic set of spacing that looks about perfect. So you kind of get the idea of what we're doing here. Once again, we're just trying to get a good sense of spacing between these modules. I think the final that we ended up picking was, let me go ahead and check really quickly. I believe it was like something like 155 or something like that. Quick way to do is just to grab the Marquee Tool and just kind of grab over. It appears to be closer to 220 or 225. But what we kind of have at this point is a set of guides. I'm just going to group them together because later on we're going to delete them, obviously. And we're going to set our text color to be pretty dark. And let's use the font Museo because that's what I used for the logo up here. And we want the font size to be 26 points. And we're just going to give these modules some titles really quickly. And if you notice, I'm basically just trying to run this up against the left of each one of these. All right, that looks pretty good. At this point, we can basically just kind of go ahead and delete those, or we can hide them off and on. And we also may want to play with the spacing of our font. At this point, it's a pretty good time to swap out the font if you want to use something different. Now let's add some basic body copy or some descriptive text inside of these. And I'm just going to grab the text tool and I'm just drawing a text box that's going to go through the width of this. Let's go ahead and make it Lucida Sans once again. And let's go ahead and set it to 12 point. And let's make a lighter gray because we don't want it to dominate any attention. But we do want it to be readable. So you can kind of get that idea. If you've ever worked with lorem ipsum before, you know it's probably a pretty good place to start for filling text. If you want to find it, go ahead and Google it. You can just go and kind of generate your own lorem ipsum. Just grab some text here and go back into your document and paste it on in there. And let's set the line height to 18 point in this case. And let's go to the paragraph and let's turn off hyphenation so you get a nice pretty wrap on the right side. So let's go ahead and pair up some of these. Turn them into groups. I'm going to duplicate this twice. Again, we're lining this up vertically here. I'm going to match this up with the next module, make it a group. And obviously we're going to do that with the final layer. That looks pretty good. And we'll make that into a module. Okay, now the final thing that we're going to be doing, first we're going to nudge these down a little bit so we have a nice sense of space between the slider and these. And the last thing we're going to be doing is adding in our icons. And once again, we're just using 16 by 16 icons. You can grab them from the Fugue set for free, or you can use your own icons if you prefer. And let's go ahead and drop these in here. The ordering does not matter at this point. Just want to make sure you get them on the right layer sets. And naturally we have some overlap there, so I'm going to grab all three of the text title layers, holding down the Shift and the Control key. Oops. And we're just going to nudge them over until they're all perfectly spaced out. Now in this case, I'm noticing, that the text on these module titles feels pretty big, so I'm just going to drop them down a little bit in size. And once again, for instance, if you're working with a client and you're noticing that they have like a sentence for some of these titles, you're going to want to drop down the size. The same goes for this. I have a little bit longer than what I used in the demo, so I'm just going to drop it back a little bit. Play around until I get a perfect spacing. You can also play with the weight. You just kind of want to get something that's nice and harmonious with, the rest of the template that's going on. Adjust the spacing. That looks pretty good right there. Adjust that. And that's about it, actually. Let's go ahead and drop in an image just to kind of, see what it's going to look like as the final design. Just going to go find it in one of my image folders really quickly. Hang on one second. Alright, so let's go ahead and grab it and just kind of, first let's select the background layer for that slider, and we're just going to drag it on there. And obviously all we want to do at this point is make it a clipping mask over that layer and drag it so it fits perfectly. At this point you can obviously go back in and adjust how dramatic that inner shadow is. You can make it really, really dramatic if you want. You can kind of drop it back this way. It's kind of at this point in the design process that you can kind of go off on your own tangent. This is going to be the end of this part of the video tutorial, but obviously at this point you kind of do whatever you want with this kind of stuff. For instance, try making the background a dramatically different color. Kind of get crazy with how everything is looking until you find something that's going to match your own visual style. So that's going to wrap up today's session. Tomorrow we're going to be doing some pre-flight and pre-coding work. We're basically going to be hunting down all the stuff we need to slice, and we're going to be gathering all of the different scripts together. In day 3, we're going to be coding this thing into HTML and CSS. And in day 4, we're going to be creating our own custom hybrids, basically showing how flexible this template is in terms of, using a couple small things to create a dramatically different template. So I hope you guys pay attention to the next couple days. I think it's going to be pretty good, and thanks again for listening. Have a good one, you guys. Thanks.